Oliver, thanks for your time today.
A pleasure.
We're going to be talking about best-in-class IT consultants,
Yeah.
and as someone who's been in the IT consultancy business for some years now, I'd be particularly interested in your thoughts and views. So I plan to ask you a few questions around this, and I'll be very interested in your replies and learning from your experiences, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
So, firstly, in this fast-changing world of IT, I imagine that thought leadership is a critical area of skill for today's IT consultant. What does thought leadership mean to you?
Yeah, it's a very good point. I think it is a very needed skill for the consultant, and I think it's a very unusual and rare one. I think there's a combination of artist, creator, as well as a very scientific, methodological person who can be truly thought of as a thought leader, as well as someone who's established credibility, so that when they come up with a new theory, a new work paradigm, it has some substance behind it. I think they tend to be radical, bold, people who can be a catalyst for new ways of thinking. They're often the first step towards radical change. Some would say they're heretics, so they challenge the norm consistently and challenge why things were put in place in the first place, and whether those factors still exist. They constantly ask questions. What if? For example, we'll ask the question, what would the web do? When we're faced with a business challenge which may have a technological solution, we say, what would the web do in this circumstance? Would they set up think tanks? Would they do market research? Would they do 6 months of requirements gathering, a business change program? Probably not. The way the web services work is that they put together a set of capabilities which they think might be useful. They put it out there, see if it works, augment and adapt in an agile fashion until they've either got the market leader or the thing is allowed to die. So that's a kind of radical question that I'd expect a thought leader to ask.
So looking at things really from a completely different perspective.
That's absolutely right, but taking into account data and experience and challenging the things that shape normality as it is today, if you like.
Okay, no, I understand that. When we've spoken in the past, you've mentioned the importance of what you called client intimacy. What exactly do you mean by that?
Yeah, I sometimes get a few raised eyebrows when I mention the phrase intimacy, but what I'm really talking about is getting into the mind or getting into the shoes of your client. And I believe that that is simply a function of the amount of time you spend with them. And it's as simple as that.
Right.
Obviously that has to be valuable time, but even social time is part of it as well. I believe that you get better results for clients if you understand what motivates them in work, outside of work as well, what their beliefs are, what their values are, their motivations, where they want to be, things that have happened to them in the past, the trust relationships that they have with their peers, their superiors and their subordinates, and the relationships that they feel they have from a trust perspective as well. And I truly believe that the amount of time you spend with somebody, client or in one's personal life, is directly related to how well you understand what they're really about, what they really want, peeling back the subtleties of their value systems and motivations. And I found that in the past, the more I know someone, and in various situations, formal meetings, water cooler chats, as they say in America, even socialising, the more you get that rounded picture of the individual and can give them what they want and what they need.
So would you say the ultimate test of client intimacy is if the client sees you as a trusted friend?
Yeah, so you'll of course heard the trusted advisor moniker, and that's something that consultants tend to aspire to. I had an occasion when someone senior said, "Well, get Oliver to do this piece of work," and the person who was reporting to this chap said, "Well, you realise he doesn't work for us; he's a consultant." And the senior chap said, "Oh, sorry, I've forgotten." And that was quite a compliment in a way, because it meant that you were in the organisation as an integral part of it, a trusted part of it, to the extent that you were no longer seen as an outsider.
Very, very interesting. Thank you for that. To what extent do you think that an IT consultant needs to be a strategic, holistic thinker?
I think there's almost a difference between strategic thinking, which is looking for the future, working out all the bits of the moving parts and how that's going to change what's required in the future, and holistic thinking, which is taking into account everything. And I think for a successful consultant needs both. They need to understand the big picture, and for that they need to have had experience in all the different areas from procurement through supply management to service management projects, service desk, etc., all the way through to disaster recovery, decommissioning, etc., and maybe have specialisms in 2 or 3 of those. But I think holistic thinking leads to strategic thinking. I think you can't have a strategist who doesn't understand the big picture.
No, okay, no, I understand that. So it's a balance of those skill sets that's required.
Yeah, and I think if you're talking about breadth and depth, I think to be the strategy level, breadth is more important. I think you need specialisms in certain areas. I mean, I've been lucky enough to work in most of those areas, but be a specialist in a couple of them. And I think that's probably all that you can hope for. I think the breadth of experience is the important thing.
Okay, that's great, thank you. Presumably, a best-in-class IT consultant is really good at problem solving. At times, this must feel a bit like being a detective trying to solve a puzzle. What do you think of this analogy?
Yeah, I always like the analogy, least of all, because it makes us feel like we're doing something interesting and sexy, being a detective. But it is like that, in that there are qualities of a good detective, which are very similar to qualities of a good IT consultant. So, for example, if you're tasked with coming in and creating a green strategy for a CIO, for example, which is a problem I faced, where would you start? Which is a little bit like solving a crime. You pull in the usual suspects, and you one by one you determine, based on data and logic rather than personal prejudice, who the culprits are.
Yeah.
For example, we assumed that the data centres were going to be the biggest culprit when it came to green emissions and the use of electricity.
Right.
It turned out that wasn't the case, and over the estate there were many comms rooms where the telephony switches were held that actually contributed overall, over the country, a much bigger carbon footprint than the data centres ever did. Because the data centres had been subject to more rigorous scrutiny in the past. So we pulled in the usual suspects, as it were, and we'd applied dispassionate numerical data analysis and found something that was counterintuitive. That combined with the experience of a detective, which gives you that sort of intuition about what's really happening, dispassionate nature, so looking at a problem without caring what the solution is, which is why my company, the consulting arm, is a different legal entity from the rest of the services organisation, as an attempt for us not to be biased in pushing solutions that other parts of the company would be interested in. Other things that you hope is, again, their agnosticism, tenacity, and that combination of methodology about gathering and simulating data with that little bit of artistry, hunch that you get as a detective that you also get as a consultant. I think it's an analogy that works well.
So the key skill really is getting to the truth of the matter, getting to the root cause of problems, and not stopping until you feel that you have.
Exactly. So what we tend to do is we put forward hypotheses, really based on scientific method. So we put forward hypotheses about what the problem is, and we gather data to support or refute that hypothesis, much like a scientist would do. We subject that to peer review, and they say, I really do not think this is a trust issue, I think this is a values issue, for whatever reason, and we get challenged by our peers on that basis. We do a similar process when we're solutionising. We come up with hypotheses for solutions to a particular problem. Sometimes they're technological, sometimes they're human-based. Again, we gather the data which will challenge that hypothesis. And as that, we're sort of applying a scientific method, if you like, to problem solving.